And now, New Horizons, a look at new developments in the fields of science and medicine, their meaning, their significance in our lives today. Here is Gilbert Kriegel with today's report.
While the results of astronaut Alan Shepard's historic spaceflight last month were known immediately, the detailed facts of keen interest to scientists were not. Most of the data had to be processed and painstakingly analyzed. On Tuesday of last week, a month later, the facts were in, and astronaut Shepard, together with members of the scientific team involved in the flight, had a full report for the world's scientific community. Among the findings were these. Astronaut Shepard's only difficulty encountered during the flight was a momentary but inconsequential blurring of vision which occurred shortly after launching. His doctors found a slight weight loss as a result of the flight, which they described as a small physiological price to pay for his historic journey, and a doubling of his heartbeat rate during the moments of maximum stress in his 15-minute flight. Astronaut Shepard, on his part, suggested that two lessons could be drawn from his experience. The astronaut training program could be shortened, and as a more personal suggestion, the number of body fluid samples obtained in physical examinations by means of needles could probably be reduced to the greater comfort of the astronaut. Astronaut Shepard endured his maximum stress of 11 times the force of gravity during the capsule's re-entry into the atmosphere. But, he reported, this stress was not unduly difficult, nor, for that matter, were the 5 minutes of weightlessness in mid-flight a sensation he compared to floating. These and other findings were in a detailed scientific report presented at a day-long conference on medical results of the flight. The papers presented by the scientific team filled a 116-page book, complete with charts and diagrams. The conference was sponsored by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in cooperation with the National Institutes of Health and the Space Science Board of the National Academy of Sciences. Some 500 representatives of industry, government, and the medical profession, as well as representatives of 31 embassies, attended the symposium. In a discussion of the flight plan for America's first manned space flight, technically known as the MR-3 flight, Christopher Kraft, Assistant Chief of the Flight Operations Division of Project Mercury Manned Space Program, told the conference this.
Approximately 10 minutes before the capsule actually landed, the helicopters were in the area and actually followed the capsule down to the water. The helicopters were right on the capsule 2 minutes after the capsule landed in the water and were contacting the astronaut. The details of the investigation of the capsule showed that it had indeed withstood the flight with no damage. It was in excellent condition, and we feel that it could be used again to make similar type flights.
A medical team examined the astronaut immediately after the flight aboard the recovery ship, the aircraft carrier Lake Champlain. Astronaut Shepard was examined again, more thoroughly, at his next stop. That was after the flight, of course, at the Grand Bahama Island. Both of the examinations included a debriefing of the astronaut in which he was allowed to talk at length about his experience. Dr. Carmalt Jackson, a member of the medical team, reported on the results.
The flight profile was completed without difficulty on the 5th of May, 1961, and the first post-flight physical examination was performed aboard the aircraft carrier Lake Champlain. Blood and urine specimens were collected. The pilot was asked to begin debriefing in the form of free dictation, and 3 hours from liftoff, interrupting his free dictation, he was carried to Grand Bahama by aircraft from the carrier. On arrival at this remote island site, he seemed to me quietly elated. His own statement of general fitness included a wonderful flight. Everything went well. I feel fine. The psychiatrist at the time of his interview, which actually took place following the next general physical examination, had some interesting things to say. He felt that the subject was, quote, calm and self-possessed. Some degree of excitement and exhilaration was noted. He was unusually cheerful and expressed delight that his performance during the flight had actually been better than he had expected. There were no unusual sensations regarding weightlessness, isolation, or separation from the Earth. Again, no abnormalities of thought or impairment of intellectual functions were noted. From this material, now reviewed, it's obvious that we've had a brief sortie into this new environment. And we've drawn no conclusions except perhaps to say that we believe our pilot paid a very small physiologic price for his ride.
Astronaut Shepard's performance of his duties during the flight, as recorded by various devices that included a camera trained upon him, also came under scrutiny. Project Mercury psychologist Dr. Robert Vos gave this report on the quality of the astronaut's performance in space.
The sources of data indicate that the pilot met all requirements of the mission, that he monitored and reported accurately the critical events of the flight, that he controlled the attitude of the spacecraft within normal limits, that he was alert at all times to novel and unprogrammed events, that he showed no tendency to become fixated on irrelevant instrumentation or activities. In addition to the basic activities required to ensure a successful mission, he made several attitude maneuvers to evaluate the manual control systems and spent some time examining the Earth's surface and reporting what he was able to see.
Astronaut Shepard had his own story to tell of his historic flight. He again expressed the wonderment at the view he had of the Earth from space.
As I have said publicly before, when it came time to look through the periscope, I really wasn't quite prepared for the view. We had looked at photographs, of course, describing the geographic area, the terrain features and so on. But looking at approximately 1,600-mile diameter circle of the Earth's surface with clouds and so on, really was just a bit breathtaking.
Weightlessness has long been a question mark to space scientists because it involved a phenomenon that could not be fully duplicated and therefore adequately studied in simulated conditions on Earth. Astronaut Shepard described what it felt like after experiencing more than 5 minutes of the condition during his space flight.
I will go back to comment about the weightless period. It was very comfortable. I had no difficulty in breathing. I had no difficulty in moving. I had no difficulty in talking. And certainly for that period of time and for periods of time much greater than that, we are very encouraged by the results of this flight with respect to the weightless condition.
Re-entry, plunging into the Earth's atmosphere with a force 10 to 12 times his weight, was the most critical phase of astronaut Shepard's flight. He had trained long and hard for this in the centrifuge, a spinner device that whirled him like cream in a cream separator. The training paid off handsomely.
Getting back now to the re-entry, where we build up to a peak G of approximately 11 and then back off again. Here again, the period in the centrifuge paid off. I found that I had learned the proper techniques and that I was able to move as required and I was able to breathe as required and able to communicate to the ground intelligibly.
Astronaut Shepard then provided his own account of his landing in the water and of the steps he took to facilitate his recovery.
I made ready for landing somewhere in the altitude, about 5,000 feet altitude. By this I mean that I opened the faceplate of the helmet, took off the hose which provides the sealing gas, oxygen, for the faceplate seal. I took off the chest strap, and I removed my knee restraints. The reason I did this was to allow myself a little more freedom of action in case I had to make some rapid maneuvers after landing. The landing was somewhere between 10 and 12 G, as has been indicated by our records. It certainly wasn't any more uncomfortable than a catapult shot on an aircraft carrier. The capsule at this point was at an angle of about 60 or 70 degrees down from the vertical, that is, with the small end off the vertical. And I could look out the right-hand porthole and see the water, although I didn't see any fishes. I could look out the left-hand porthole and see the dye marker. And I remember thinking at this point that I was in pretty good shape, that as a result of the training program, I felt quite up to and quite ready for an underwater escape should the occasion arise. Well, of course, as most of you know, it did not arise, and I lay there in the couch while the capsule righted itself, and I started actually making a readout of the various gauges in the cockpit for data purposes, but at that point I got a call from the helicopter, and I was able to establish communications with him, which seemed a little more important at the time.
Astronaut Alan Shepard's space flight is now history. What you have heard are some of the scientific details, along with portions of Shepard's own personal account of his flight.
And with this report, we conclude this week's edition of New Horizons. This program is heard on the Voice of America every Wednesday at this same time.
This program has come to you from the United States of America.